This video appeared out of nowhere and is causing a huge stir on YouTube. According to the narration, Sasha Obama allegedly faced discriminatory treatment at Ronald Reagan Airport, and the situation escalated so much that her father, former President Barack Obama, had to step in. But here's the strange part. The audio doesn't mention a date, airline, or time. Just a simple oversight. Or is someone hiding something? Before we believe it, we need to answer one key question. Did this really happen? Let's investigate. Subscribe and share your impression of this case in the comments. I decided to start my investigation from the beginning, the airport. I believed that through security cameras and staff reports, I could get some answers. But I didn't expect how difficult it would be to obtain even the smallest piece of information. From the moment I tried to contact official sources, I encountered invisible barriers. Access to video records was restricted, and no one seemed willing to speak openly about the matter. It was as if I were being watched from the shadows. It was the early hours of January 21st when I decided to take a deep dive into the video that had caught my attention. It was titled "Airport Staff Kicked Out Sasha Obama, but Regretted Everything" when her father Barack Obama arrived, and had been uploaded to YouTube on December 21st, 2024. I did so in hopes of finding something clear, some solid clue that would help me understand what had really happened at the airport. I knew that social media, with its vast ocean of information, might offer something. It was the first place I needed to check, and I was convinced I would find a lead, no matter how small. But what I didn't know was that this investigation would be like a maze, with more dead ends than I could have imagined. I started with the obvious: Google searches. Sasha Obama, Ronald Reagan Airport incident. I typed into the search bar, hoping to find something revealing. The results were mostly articles discussing Sasha Obama's presence at past events, but nothing related to the airport or a tense incident. I thought that maybe the juiciest details would be found in forums, where users, beyond the carefully crafted headlines, often share what mainstream media leaves out. According to Snopes, a fact-checking website, there was no credible evidence that Sasha Obama had been kicked out of the airport. They stated that it was merely a rumor, originating from a YouTube video with no real foundation. The forums were my next stop, and although I spent hours going through old posts, everything seemed carefully archived or deleted. It's curious how discussion threads on political topics, especially those related to public figures, tend to disappear quickly when they touch on uncomfortable subjects. As if somehow someone had access to erase those traces so easily. My search on forums like Reddit and Quora barely yielded any superficial mentions of the Obama's visit to Washington, but absolutely nothing about the airport incident. I found it incredible that this video had gained so many views over the course of a month, and there was no mention of that event anywhere else on social media. So I decided to try something more direct, contacting some official sources. First, the Ronald Reagan International Airport, the main stage of this mystery. The airport's website offered contact through emails and phone lines. I called. No one knew anything, or at least they didn't give me anything concrete. They only told me that if I was looking for video information, I'd have to go through a more formal process. A formal process? Since when did such a public incident require so much bureaucracy to obtain information? I felt like something wasn't right, and I started paying more attention to the details and the responses. Nothing was simple, and each step seemed designed to distract me. Sorry, that information is restricted. Could you send us a formal email? They told me. But I realized that all along they were steering me away from the heart of the evidence. Something told me this wasn't just protocol. Then I hit an even bigger dead end. The TSA. I spoke to several agents, and every time I asked about security in that specific area, or about any recent incidents, their responses were vague, evasive. I particularly remember one agent who seemed to have something more to say. At first, he gave me the impression that he was willing to share something, but his tone quickly changed when he noticed that my focus was more detailed. He said, "Security situations aren't something that's discussed outside official channels, my friend." It was a standard response, but there was something in his gaze, something fleeting, that made me think he knew more. Why the evasion? What was he trying to hide? I decided that, to get more details, I had to get closer physically. I needed to find a way to talk to someone who might have a direct view of what had happened. I headed to the same airport, hoping to find another clue. I walked through the terminal, observing the employees, looking for those who seemed to have direct connections to the check-in area. That's when I saw a couple of cleaning workers who seemed a little more relaxed than the rest of the security staff. After a brief conversation, I realized they were more than just regular employees. They knew far more than they let on. "Did you see anyone famous around here in November?" I asked them subtly, not being too direct, but with enough curiosity. One of them raised his eyebrows, as if evaluating whether to share what he knew. "No one special. You know, this is a very busy airport, and it's not uncommon to see celebrities here." So, I rephrased the question, "Would you recognize Barack Obama or his daughter if you saw them?" "Yeah, sure. I saw the Obamas walking through here, but I didn't see anything unusual. They were just walking toward the gates." "Nothing unusual?" I insisted. My mind started making connections, but all I got was a shrug. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, although some of the agents seemed nervous, like they were waiting for something. Those words, "waiting for something," echoed in my head. What does waiting for something mean in the context of an airport? It wasn't a common phrase. What kind of event could be so out of the ordinary that it made TSA agents nervous? I said goodbye to them, but the information I gathered was just a clue. It was clear that the airport employees, although they seemed to know something, didn't dare to speak too much. My frustration grew with every step, but I also started to understand that something much bigger was happening. Why couldn't they give me a clear answer? The lack of cooperation, the isolation of details, everything pointed to the fact that something was being kept hidden. A day after my last visit, I received an email from the airport with the official response to my request for video records. "Unfortunately, we cannot provide the requested footage. For security and privacy reasons, we cannot share videos of airport security areas." The response seemed so standard, so impersonal, that it left me with the feeling that they weren't telling me everything they knew. Why such an emphatic refusal? What was in those videos that they couldn't allow to be seen? With each attempt to get closer to the truth, the doors kept closing. However, something inside me told me I couldn't stop there, that I had to keep going. Every obstacle, every evasive response only fueled my determination to keep searching for answers. But what had really happened in that critical area of the airport? The clues were minimal, but something told me I needed to keep digging. There was something in the air that wouldn't let me rest. The vague answers, the evasions from the airport staff, and above all, the impossibility of accessing video records made me feel like I was on the verge of discovering something big. But I couldn't do it from a distance. The only way to move forward was to be there in person, observing with my own eyes, feeling the atmosphere, catching the details that the cameras couldn't capture. I knew it was risky. I had already asked too many questions over the phone and on forums, and I couldn't rule out the possibility that someone was aware of my investigation. But it was a risk I was willing to take. What I didn't know at that moment was that this decision would change the course of everything. I returned to the Ronald Reagan International Airport, but this time not as a passenger, but as an observer. I wanted to blend in, integrate into the routine of the place, and try to detect any anomalies. At first, everything seemed normal. Passengers dragging luggage, employees repeating the same mechanical instructions at check-in, security checking documents with the same impersonality as always. But after a few minutes, I noticed something strange. The check-in and ticketing employees weren't the same as on my last visit. It wasn't just a small rotation of staff. It was a massive reassignment. I approached different airline counters under the pretense of asking about flights, and every time I asked about a specific worker I had seen during my previous visit, the answer was the same. Sorry, but that agent no longer works this shift. Yeah, we changed the staff this week. I don't have any information on that employee. It was too strange to be a coincidence. Why reassign so many people from the same area in such a short time? What were they trying to hide? And more importantly, who was behind those changes? I decided to move cautiously. I sat in one of the waiting areas near the counters, pretending to check my phone, but in reality, I was observing everything around me. That's when I noticed a blue-uniformed employee who seemed more nervous than the others. He was looking around nervously, and although he tried to act normal, there was something in his body language that gave him away. It was as if he was waiting for someone to ask him something he didn't want to answer. I approached him slowly, and in a casual tone, I asked if he remembered any incident that had caused a stir involving Sasha Obama. The atmosphere shifted completely. His expression tensed. His eyes darted quickly from side to side, as if making sure no one was listening. Then, he lowered his voice. I shouldn't talk about that. Why? I just want to confirm if she was here, I said, pretending it was just a simple curiosity. The man licked his lips nervously. Look, I can't tell you much. I just know that, yes, she was here, but it wasn't a normal procedure. Something happened. Something no one wants to talk about. What do you mean by it wasn't normal? I asked, leaning in a little closer. His breathing quickened, and for a moment, it seemed like he was debating whether to continue talking or turn his back on me. Finally, he whispered, "It wasn't the usual agents escorting her. She looked nervous, and there were people in the airport who shouldn't have been there." That last phrase froze me in place. What do you mean by people who shouldn't have been there? The employee opened his mouth, but at that moment his radio beeped. A short message, but clear enough. Security section, code 17. I saw the panic in his face. "I'm sorry. I can't talk anymore." And without saying another word, he walked away, blending into the crowd. But it was too late. He had said enough. The atmosphere had changed. Suddenly, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was as if someone was watching me. My instinct told me I shouldn't stay in the same spot for too long. I walked slowly toward the restaurant area, pretending to check my phone, but with my peripheral vision, I observed the surroundings. And then I saw him, a man in civilian clothes, with a barely noticeable earpiece in his right ear. He wasn't traveling, didn't have luggage, wasn't waiting for anyone. But every time I moved, he moved too. There was no doubt. I was being watched. I took a deep breath. I couldn't act suspicious. I sat down at a coffee, ordered something to drink, and forced my mind to think clearly. If they had already noticed my presence, it meant I was closer to the truth than I thought. But the question was, what were they trying so hard to hide? And more importantly, how far were they willing to go to make sure I didn't find out? The story I thought I was investigating had just taken an unexpected turn. This wasn't just a simple incident at the airport. There were forces operating in the shadows. But the key question still remained unanswered. What really happened that day? What I discovered next was even more shocking than I had imagined. As my investigation progressed, the feeling that something didn't add up grew stronger. It wasn't just the lack of official information or the strange staff rotation at the airport. It was the way people reacted every time I asked questions. There was something else, something I couldn't fully see, but that I could feel in every evasive answer, in every uncomfortable glance, in every conversation abruptly ended. And the conversation with the lady at the kiosk confirmed everything. After noticing that the check-in and ticketing staff were acting suspiciously, I decided to change my approach. Sometimes, the best clues come from those on the fringes, those who go unnoticed, who see and hear things without anyone paying attention to them. And at that airport, if there was anyone who fit that description, it was the lady at the coffee and magazine kiosk near the ticket counters. She was a woman in her 60s, with a friendly face, but the tired look of someone who has spent their whole life serving hurried travelers. She was organizing newspapers when I approached. "Good morning," I said with a smile, trying to sound relaxed.
"Good morning, young man. What will you have?"
I ordered a coffee, just to have an excuse to talk to her. Then, casually, I pointed to a magazine on the counter with a photo of former First Lady Michelle Obama. "You know, I heard a rumor that Sasha Obama passed through here at the end of November. Did you see anything?" As soon as I mentioned the name, the woman froze. For a moment it felt like the air got heavier. She blinked several times, as if she hadn't understood the question. But her reaction was too pronounced to be a coincidence.
"What did you say?"
she asked with a forced smile, but her hands trembled slightly as she arranged the newspapers. "Sasha Obama," I repeated. "Didn't you hear anything about that?"
"I don't know what you're talking about,"
she responded hurriedly. Too fast. Too rehearsed. Something in her expression made me doubt. It wasn't just that she didn't want to talk. It was as if she was afraid to do so. I decided to push a little further, but cautiously. "Come on, ma'am. You're here all day. You must have seen things that most people haven't." She forced another smile, but this time her eyes nervously darted to the left, as if looking for someone.
"I have no idea what you're talking about, young man. If you're not buying anything else, please, let me get back to my work."
And then something happened that sent a chill down my spine. As soon as she finished speaking, she slammed the cash register closed more forcefully than necessary and flipped the closed sign at the kiosk, even though it was still early and there were customers waiting. It was a farewell, a silent message that the conversation was over, and that I needed to leave. I walked away from the kiosk, but my mind kept replaying the scene over and over. Why did she get so nervous? What did she know that she couldn't say? Up until that moment, my investigation had encountered obstacles, yes, but never such an evident fear. This could only mean one thing. Someone was controlling the information about what happened at the airport that late November morning. And if they were controlling it, it was because there was something worth hiding. But the worst part wasn't that. The worst part was that, without realizing it, I was also being watched. As I left the kiosk area, I felt something was off. It was like a sensation at the back of my neck, an instinct telling me I wasn't alone. I walked aimlessly, pretending to be busy on my phone. I looked around discreetly, trying to spot any suspicious movement. And then I noticed him, a man in a dark suit, sitting on a bench a few meters away. He had no luggage, wasn't looking at his phone, wasn't talking to anyone. But every time I moved, he did too. At another time, I would have ignored it. But now, after the woman's reaction, after all the evasive answers and the staff changes, I knew this wasn't a coincidence. Everything was clear now. There were people who didn't want me to know the truth. But what I didn't know at that moment was, how far were they willing to go to make sure I didn't keep investigating? The next revelation would make everything feel even more dangerous. After my encounter with the lady at the kiosk and the persistent feeling of being watched, I knew I had to change my approach. I couldn't keep asking questions openly without drawing too much attention. I needed to find new ways to get answers. What I didn't know at that moment was that the pieces of the puzzle were about to fit together in a way I hadn't expected. And what I discovered would make everything feel even stranger. I started looking for airport employees who seemed less watched, those who didn't hold high-profile positions, and who might have been in the right place at the right time. I knew the big answers often come from the voices no one listens to. The first person I spoke to was a young maintenance worker who was smoking a cigarette in the employee area. I approached cautiously. "Hey, I've got a question." He exhaled the smoke slowly before looking at me.
It depends. What do you want to know?
I didn't want to be too direct. "I heard something weird happened here in early December. A lot of people were reassigned all of a sudden." His eyes narrowed slightly.
Who told you that?
"I just noticed it. Also, there are rumors someone important was here." There was silence. A silence that lasted too long. Then, he looked around as if making sure no one else was listening. And then he said it.
If you knew what I saw that night.
He stopped and shook his head.
No, forget it. I don't want any trouble.
Trouble? With who? I tried to press him. "Man, just tell me this. Was Sasha Obama here?" He stomped out his cigarette with more force than necessary.
I shouldn't be talking about this. And you shouldn't be asking.
He walked away quickly, leaving me with more questions than answers. Now I had something clearer. Yes, Sasha Obama had been there. But why all the secrecy? My next step was to check if there was any connection between the mass reassignment of staff and the publication of the video on social media. What I found was no coincidence. I reviewed internal records and news about changes at the airport and discovered that the staff change took place between December 5th and 18th, 2 days before the video went public on YouTube, and about a week after the incident at the end of November. Why exactly at that moment? It was as if someone had known what was going to happen before it happened, and that meant something terrifying. If someone tried to cover up what happened, they did it before the story went viral. As I spoke to more airport employees, I noticed a strange pattern. Several mentioned that during that week, there had been new faces in the check-in and security areas. One guard, after several questions, told me,
"Look, kid, I've worked here for years, and I had never seen those people. They came, did their job, and disappeared."
"Disappeared?" I asked.
"Yeah, they were temporarily assigned, and then I never saw them again, as if they'd never been here."
This left me frozen. Who were those people? Why were they there only during the exact time the incident occurred? But the most disturbing thing came next.
"Also, I heard something weird in the check-in area,"
the guard added, lowering his voice. There was tension. People whispering, quiet discussions. It felt strange. "Do you remember anything specific?"
"Just that, when I got close, everyone went silent."
A chill ran down my spine. Every time I thought I was close to an answer, the doors closed in front of me. The people who knew something avoided talking. The evidence disappeared. The records didn't exist. And the more I investigated, the more I felt someone was making sure the truth never came to light. But then something happened that changed everything. A tiny detail that, at first, I didn't pay attention to. A piece of information hidden in plain sight. And when I discovered it, I realized everything I thought I knew up to that point was wrong. By this point, everything I had discovered pointed to something bigger than I had initially imagined. But there was a problem. Every piece of information I obtained was incomplete, vague, or surrounded by fear. The employees I spoke to avoided looking me in the eyes. Some even walked away before I could ask them a single question. And the most disturbing thing, I felt like someone was watching me, but not just out of curiosity, like a passenger or an airport worker might. It was different. It was the feeling of always being scrutinized, as if every move I made was being recorded. And the worst part was that I still didn't have enough evidence to prove that something was actually being covered up. But that was about to change. I tried asking casual questions to some employees, without seeming too persistent. One of the first people I spoke to was a security agent who was checking his phone while working his shift in the main hallway of the airport. "Hey man, can I ask you a quick question?" He barely looked up.
It depends.
"There's been a lot of talk about an ex-president's presence here at the end of November. Anything unusual?" His reaction gave him away. It wasn't what he said, but how he tensed up. He raised his head completely now, looking at me in a way that said more than any words.
Who told you that?
I shrugged. "I just heard it around." He looked away and shook his head.
Look, if I were you, I wouldn't keep asking.
"Why?" Silence. A heavy, uncomfortable silence. And then, as if he regretted saying too much, he quickly walked away, as if being near me was dangerous. That sent chills down my spine. I decided to play the part of just another passenger and observe. I sat near a cafe with a view of the security area and focused on watching the interactions between airport employees and TSA agents. And what I saw didn't seem normal. First, I noticed that airport employees avoided making eye contact with the TSA agents. Every time an agent spoke to them, they nodded quickly and walked away. But the strangest thing was how some workers seemed to constantly report to a supervisor who wasn't in uniform. He wasn't a security officer or a shift leader, at least not officially. He was a tall man in a dark suit who never stayed in one place for long. He watched. He analyzed. He supervised. And several times, I saw how employees who had seemed willing to talk changed their attitude after crossing paths with him. I tried to talk to a woman who worked in cleaning. She was older, about 60 years old, and had the air of someone who had seen more things than she was willing to share. I approached cautiously. "Excuse me, have you worked here for a long time?" She nodded, without stopping her cleaning.
More than 20 years.
"Then you must have seen a lot of strange things, right?" She paused for a moment and glanced at me sideways.
Why do you ask?
"I've heard that there was unusual activity here at the beginning of December. Some employees were reassigned, and important figures were present." She put the mop aside.
If I were you, I'd drop that topic.
"Why?" She went back to her work without answering. Silence. But then, before I could leave, she murmured something without looking at me.
There are things it's better not to know.
And that made me shiver. Every conversation I had seemed to draw more attention to me. The same security agents who had previously not noticed my presence now seemed to be following me with their eyes. On one occasion, I entered an airport bathroom, and when I came out, I noticed that two men were in the same area where I had been asking questions just minutes before. One of them had an earpiece in his ear. The other was holding a phone, but seemed more focused on me than on his screen. They knew I was investigating, and if I kept going, I had to do it with much more caution, because something was being covered up, something they didn't want anyone to discover. But what I didn't know at that moment was that I was about to make a mistake that would change everything. If up until now the story had been unsettling, what was about to happen would take it to another level. Because in my attempt to uncover the truth, I got too close. And when I did, I made sure they noticed me. But the question is, how far would they be willing to go to silence me? I had reached a point I never imagined. There was something they didn't want me to find out. The watchful glances, the evasions, the silences. Everything indicated I was close to something important. But there was a problem. I had no proof. No matter how much I investigated, how many questions I asked, or how many hours I spent reconstructing the events in my head, there was nothing solid, nothing I could hold on to without being called paranoid. And the worst part was that the more I tried to move forward, the more doors were closing. But here's where it gets even stranger. Because when I reviewed everything I had gathered so far, I noticed a pattern I hadn't seen before. A detail so obvious that I couldn't believe I had missed it. And when I saw it, I understood that this mystery was much bigger than I had imagined. But before I get to that, you need to know how I got here. I spent hours going over my notes, the conversations with the employees, the evasions, the nervous glances, the man in the dark suit. Everything pointed to something that shouldn't be revealed. But what? It could have just been an exaggerated security protocol. Or maybe someone important had caused a problem and they were covering it up. But the more I thought about it, the more doubts arose. If it was just a minor issue, why did so many people seem terrified to speak? If it wasn't important, why did I feel like I was being watched? And the worst part, if everything I saw was a coincidence, why did every clue seem to lead me to an insurmountable wall? There were two possibilities. 1. The incident at the airport was simply a misunderstanding, and people were afraid to speak for fear of losing their jobs. 2. Or something truly important had happened, and there was an active effort to erase any trace of it. And then one question hit me like a brick. Why couldn't anyone give me a single detail about the event? Everyone knew it had happened, or at least that was my impression. There were rumors. There was fear. But when I tried to get something concrete, nothing. It was like the event had never occurred. Like it had been erased from the collective memory. Was someone controlling the narrative? For the first time since I started this investigation, I asked myself, is it worth continuing? I had come too far. I knew something was happening. I could feel it in every conversation, in every evasive look. But I also knew this. I had no proof. Without proof, I had no story. And without a story, all of this meant nothing. So, would I stop here? Or would I take one more step, even if it meant risking more than necessary? The decision was mine. But what I didn't know at that moment was that someone else had already made a decision for me. And what I was about to discover would change everything. Here's the most frustrating part of this whole story. After days of investigation, of unanswered questions, of evasions, of doors being slammed in my face, after feeling like I was getting closer and closer to the truth, I realized something unsettling. Maybe I was never going to get a definitive answer. And worse, maybe the answer was no longer in my hands. I had two options. 1. Keep everything I discovered, close this chapter, and pretend it never happened. 2. Publish it, share it with the world, and let others try to solve what I couldn't. But publishing the story was a risk, because it wasn't just about what I had found. It was about what was still left to discover. What if someone had more pieces of the puzzle? What if this story wasn't over yet? What if by sharing it, someone else found the key I couldn't? There were too many unanswered questions. Why was the staff reassigned during that period? Why did every witness seem terrified to speak? And who was behind all of this? But the most unsettling question was this. If there really was nothing to hide, why was so much effort put into making sure no one spoke? That was the biggest mystery of all. Because when someone tries to hide something, it's because there's something worth discovering. I'm not going to pretend that I have all the answers. I'm not going to tell you that I uncovered the absolute truth. But I can tell you this. What I found is enough to know that this story doesn't end here. And now the question is, who will be the next to continue it? Subscribe to discover our investigations and explore a little beyond what most people know. Because if there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that the best stories never have a clear ending. There's always something more. There's always a missing piece. And what really matters is who will be willing to find it. Maybe a new witness will appear and help decipher the unsolved mysteries of this story. Leave your thoughts or any contributions to the investigation in the comments. And regarding the YouTube video we started with, I wonder if the interactions it details are the truth. And if they are true, I wonder, is it the whole truth? What I do agree on is that something unusual happened, something that led to the massive removal of personnel and an effort to keep a shadow of mystery over what occurred.